You're now listening to The Boring History for Sleep, How Aztec Gardeners Engineered Floating Farms in Silence. Let your mind drift, your shoulders relax, and sink softly into this slow, sleepy journey through ancient waters and floating gardens. Hey guys, tonight we drift into a world that hums below the radar of war drums and pyramids, where farming meant not standing on land but floating on it. You're here in the heart of the Valley of Mexico, long before concrete and horns. Gliding through a chill mist that curls around your hands like the fingers of a dream not quite let go. You're in a canoe, a humble dugout that creaks with every paddle stroke. The Lake Texcoco is still, too still. You half expect it to whisper. The early air smells of damp soil, crushed reeds, and the faint tang of yesterday's fish. Your fingers are blistered from yesterday's work, and you know they'll be worse by sunset. But for now, it's quiet, eerily so. This is Chinampa country, floating farms. You're heading toward one of them, yours, at least for today. It waits in the soft fog like a green raft, lashed to the lake bed with wooden stakes and your ancestors' stubborn genius. You're hungry. That's normal. You also might not make it through the season if your maize doesn't germinate. That's also normal. Welcome to paradise. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. Let's see who's up past midnight now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your calloused feet slide onto the planks of the Chinampas. You almost don't feel the step because the platform is made of layered vegetation and lake mud. It gives slightly under your weight. Not quite land, not quite boat, but it holds. That's all that matters. You get to work silently. No metal, tools, just a sharpened wooden digging stick and your thoughts, which, to be honest, are mostly just hunger and mild existential dread. But that's okay. You're in good company. Historians still argue whether Chinampas were originally invented by the Toltecs, or if they emerged organically from trial and error, basically ancient Mesoamerican prototyping, but with corn and fungus instead of spreadsheets and funding rounds. You lean down, cupping some water in your hand. It's not clean. It's never clean, but you're used to it. If it's good enough for the ducks, it's good enough for your face. You splash it on, refreshing, or maybe just a tad bacterial. There's something strangely soothing about it. Every bird call echoes louder over the flat water. A heron takes off with a cranky squawk from a neighboring Chinampa. You squint. The man working there is already hunched into his rhythm, draped in a shawl made of woven fiber, hair tied back, never looking up. You've nodded to him before, or maybe that was his cousin, or a ghost. The silence makes it hard to tell. You pluck a weed from the edge of your bean plot, toss it onto a compost pile that squishes under its own moist ambition. The plot's layout, if anyone cares to notice, is suspiciously neat. There's no coincidence here. Aztec engineers laid these islands out like game boards, rectangular, symmetrical, always aligned with canals that crisscross like veins across a sacred floating body. And yes, there's a logic behind it. These canals aren't just for show. They regulate water levels, allow for canoe access, and in a bizarre twist, sometimes function as cooling systems. Morning mists are a side effect, or, as some might argue, a gentle curse. You duck as a dragonfly dive bombs your face. Why do they always aim for the eyes? There's a rustling from under the maize rows. You freeze. Could be a rat. Could be something worse. The Chinampas are engineered marvels, sure, but they also double as condos for every sneaky creature with teeth and ambition. You don't check. You just keep digging. One of the more mainstream facts you remember being taught maybe by a bored elder half-chewing cactus pads is that these islands could grow 7 crops a year. 7. That's not just efficient. That's nature, being bullied into performance art. You push your fingers into the soil. It's warm, surprisingly so. Beneath your chinampa lies a structure older than your family, layers of reeds, sticks, and lake muck stacked with love, labor, and probably an alarming amount of duck poop. The foundation is alive, breathing decay into nutrients and somehow not collapsing in on itself like a cake left too long in the oven. Somewhere to your left, a canoe thunks softly into a post. A delivery, a priest, a mistake. You don't look. In Chinampa life, curiosity is something you reserve for festivals and jaguar sightings. There's a low hum rising from the water, not a sound, really more like a feeling. The lake shifts, just slightly. You remind yourself, Lake Texcoco is mostly dried up now in your time, reduced to ghost neighborhoods and dust. But here, in this night's dream, it is full, vast, and watching. You chew a piece of dried chili root from your pocket. It's bitter. Maybe you like it that way, or maybe it's all that's left. Rationing is a quiet thing here. No declarations, no drama, just smaller bites. The air thickens with heat as the sun climbs. Soon the mosquitoes will come. You should finish planting your squash. But for now, you just listen to the sound of wet earth, distant flutes, and the warm hush of a floating world that refuses to sink. You're kneeling now, the morning sun making its way through a curtain of reeds, painting golden stripes across your hunched back. The warmth is nice until you realize your knees are slowly sinking into the moist edge of the Chinampa. Every inch of this floating island is a careful balance between buoyancy and gravity, and your knees are pushing their luck. The ground isn't supposed to be firm. Not exactly. It's alive. You dig your fingers into the topsoil and feel the layered texture, a dense weave of dried lake bed muck, shredded water, hyacinth, crumbled maize husks, and last season's fish bones. It shouldn't work, and yet here, it is feeding a civilization. These floating gardens, called Chinampas, are anchored by willow trees or woods planted along the edges. Their long roots act like watery nails, reaching deep into the silty bottom to keep your floating world from wandering off. Without them, the Chinampa would slide away in the night, like a polite, leafy escape artist. That actually happened once. A whole floating garden disappeared during a storm and was found a week later halfway across the lake, with a very confused heron standing on it. You press your palm flat against the soil and listen. Not with your ears, but your skin. You swear it hums faintly. This patch of earth is stable because generations layered it so. First came a raft of reeds, then thick mud dredged from the canal, then composted vegetation, again and again, like some weird Mesoamerican lasagna. Historians still argue whether this method was primarily agricultural genius, or simply the only viable option when you're trapped between shallow water, unpredictable rain, and land that's already been claimed by gods and nobles alike. You push a stick into the dirt. It meets resistance. Good sign, it means the lower layers haven't shifted. You glance toward the outer edge, where reeds are woven into little walls to hold the soil in place. Their tips dance in the breeze like lazy sentries. In time, those reeds will rot, and new ones will be added. It never ends. The Chinampa is a cycle you never graduate from. You wipe your forehead with the back of your hand. The sweat makes your skin tacky, and now the mosquitoes have found you. Fantastic. You swat at the air half-heartedly, like a noble sacrificing to the blood gods one droplet at a time. A tiny victory, one dead mosquito. 1,000 reinforcements incoming. It's said that each Chinampa is roughly 30 meters long and 2.5 meters wide. You don't measure yours. You just know how many steps it takes to walk across with a bundle of maize on your back. 26, if your knees behave. 28, if you step around that cursed lump near the eastern edge, where the soil always sags, for reasons no one dares explain. One old woman once said it was because a toad spirit lives under there and prefers soft bedding. You believed her. You still do. You reach for your water gourd, Pull off the stopper and take a sip. It tastes of clay and time, not refreshing, exactly, but grounding. A reminder that this life isn't about luxury. It's about staying alive in an ecosystem you build with your own two hands, then sleep above. Surrounded by water, hoping no one accidentally paddles through your crops at night. A squawk to your left. You look up and see a small boat cutting through the channel. A child is steering it, barefoot and giggling, likely delivering tamales or a scolding message from someone's very angry grandmother. You wave. The child ignores you. This is the way. As you watch the boat drift past, you think about how everything here floats, but nothing floats freely. The Chinampas are staked, the boats are paddled, the people are anchored by duty and mud. Even the clouds above seem to hesitate over this grid of watery farmland. One quirky fact you've heard from the old storytellers. Chinampa farmers used to bury old ceramic figurines of Tlaloc, rain god, beneath their crops to encourage good harvests. Tlaloc was moody, of course. One moment he'd bless your squash with perfect rainfall, and the next he'd summon lightning storms that shredded your maize like paper dolls. But still, the farmers believed. Some still do. Somewhere under your feet, you suspect a cracked ceramic eye is watching you. No pressure. You reach for a woven basket, filled with young seedlings' tiny maize shoots, just green curls of promise. As you press them gently into the soil, you pause. There's something deeply unnerving about planting on a patch of earth that is, technically, not earth. If you fall in, there's no telling what you'll land on: root sludge, a catfish with opinions. And yet this method worked. For centuries, it fed cities. Massive ones. Tenochtitlan alone supported hundreds of thousands, thanks in part to these floating plots. Some scholars suggest Chinampas were the most productive form of agriculture in the ancient world, yielding crops multiple times a year after year, with minimal soil depletion. Modern urban farms. Cute. The Aztecs did it first, with mud and ambition. You shift to your feet and stretch. Your back cracks, and something in your neck protests audibly. You sigh. There's no break, no shade. Just sky, sun, and the ever-present scent of rotting vegetation. You glance down at your arms, bitten, dirty, sunburned, and realize you haven't looked at your own face in weeks. There are no mirrors here, only reflections in water, and even those lie. The wind picks up slightly, sending ripples across the lake and causing your Chinampa to shiver, ever so gently. You place your hands on your hips and breathe in. This is your domain, and stable, unpredictable, and completely your responsibility. As the sun climbs higher and your stomach grumbles in protest, you remind yourself, if the roots hold, the Chinampa will stay. If the Chinampa stays, the maize will grow. And if the maize grows, well, you'll live to float another day. Your digging stick squelches into the mud with a dull schlup. Another heap of lake Bedtime sludge lands beside your squash vines, steaming slightly in the morning sun. It's the kind of work that leaves your arms aching in that particular Aztec flavor. Of this will never end, but also you have to admit a tiny dose of satisfaction. You've turned literal rot into tomorrow's food, again. The lake bed mud is rich, dense, and weirdly fragrant. Not in a bad way, just ... complicated. If dirt had a mood, this would be brooding philosopher with an earthworm mustache. You've learned to appreciate its layers, the bits of decomposed water lilies, bird droppings, crumbled bones from last week's dinner, and human offerings no one ever admits to. If you're squeamish, Chinampa, life is not your vibe. You scoop up another load. This is the magic. You remind yourself. This slop, this unglamorous, knee-deep ancient stews, what keeps your floating world alive. The act of dredging it from the canals and hauling it back onto your island is less gardening and more resurrecting the swamp for culinary purposes. You chuckle quietly. If only city nobles had to do this once a week, maybe they'd stop complaining about maize prices. But of course, they won't. You're invisible to them. always have been. Floating gardens don't scream, they whisper. There's a method to your madness. Every few weeks, the canals are scraped clean by teams of Chinampas, using flat wooden scoops that look suspiciously like tortilla paddles, only heavier and way more judgmental. The dredged sediment is spread in deliberate layers across the Chinampas surface, water weeds, then mud, then a cap of dry leaves or ash. Rinse, repeat, grow beans. Historians still debate just how organized this process was. Some argue there were guilds of Chinampa keepers, passing down secrets like magical alchemists of muck. Others believe it was all communal, trial by survival by neighborly nagging. Either way, no one ever stopped doing it. You either worked the mud or starved next to it. You reach into a clay basket and sprinkle crushed charcoal around the base of your tomato plants. It's not fancy, just yesterday's cookfire leftovers, but it keeps the soil sweet and the pests nervous. Somewhere, a beetle panics. You remember one of the elders telling you a story. Once, a boy tried to build a chinampa without layers, just dumped dirt on floating reeds and planted squash. The whole thing sank within hours, taking his sandals and half a canoe with it. To this day, it's considered bad luck to mention him by name while planting. His ghost is said to smell like wet rope and bad decisions. Still, you get it. From a distance, these gardens look so stable, so peaceful. Just long green rectangles, drifting politely across the lake like sleepy barges. But underneath, it's chaos. Constant decomposition. Microscopic warfare. Tiny root tendrils battling for nutrients in a foundation that's one good rainstorm away from turning to soup. You shift a decaying reed mat closer to the maize stalks, fortifying the western edge. The lake has risen slightly, always a sign to prepare. If water levels spike too fast, your chinampa could erode. Or worse, slide sideways like a lazy pancake. You whistle to yourself. Not a tune, just a rhythm. Your own way of keeping pace with the work. The silence around you is dense enough to press against your ribs. Only the buzz of dragonflies, the occasional bark of a dog far across the lake, and the low slap of water against canoe hulls remind you the world hasn't ended yet. You glance at the next task. A compost basket so full, it's wobbling like a guilt-ridden pudding. In it are melon rinds, bean husks, fish scales, and one very suspicious bone. You don't ask. You just dump the contents into a corner trench and cover it with reeds. One odd practice. You've never quite gotten used to spitting into the soil. Not out of disrespect. It's traditional. Some farmers believe saliva carries personal energy, bonding you to the land. Every morning, before planting the first seed, you hawk one into the hole. Charming dot, another fringe theory floating around the lake. The best chinampas grow where sacrifices were once made. You've never tested it, but there's that patch near the southern canal, where the maize never wilts, no matter how dry the season. You call it Tlaloc's favorite. You also never step on it barefoot, just in case. A gust of wind lifts your hair and cools the back of your neck. You straighten your back, stretching until your spine crackles like roasting corn. Every part of your body is filthy, sun-touched, and sore. You love it. You hate it. You wouldn't trade it. Far off. You spot a bundle of flowers, drifting lazily through the water marigolds. Maybe a sign of remembrance, or perhaps just someone's lunch decoration gone rogue. It bumps gently against the reeds at your edge and stays there, like it belongs. By mid-morning, you've laid another strip of compost, replanted to maize rows, and repacked the crumbling canal wall with fresh mud. You pause to rest, not because you're lazy, you're that, but because your chinampa deserves silence too. A moment to breathe, to settle. You squat by the water's edge and trail your fingers through the surface. A school of tiny fish dart away, then return just as quickly, curious about this large, smelly creature invading their space. You smile. One last job before the midday heat, digging a drainage trench along the eastern crop row. You start carving a shallow groove, feeling the texture shift from wet loam to more compacted clay. Every pull of the digging stick releases little bubbles. You pretend they're ghosts, escaping from an old battle buried beneath your feet, or maybe just gas pockets from decomposed goose droppings. Either way, spooky. You finish the trench and rinse your hands in the canal. They look older than they are calloused, cracked, smeared with green stains that never quite wash off. Farmer's hands, Chinampa hands. As you gather your tools and rise, the garden gives a faint creak beneath you, shifting slightly as if exhaling. You exhale too. The work is done for now. But the island is never finished. It waits. It breathes. It remembers every footstep pressed into its layered skin. You're up before the sun again, because of course you are. The lake doesn't wait for sleep, and neither do Chinampas. You paddle slowly through the early gray light, your canoe slicing through the still water, with a quiet grace you'll never get credit for. You're headed toward the eastern side of your plot, the spot where you planted the holy trio. Corn, beans, and squash. It sounds simple enough. 3 plants. But these 3, they dance together. A choreography older than pyramids and just as sacred. You hop off the canoe and step lightly onto your floating garden. The squash vines have already begun to creep slow, leafy explorers colonizing the rich soil. The beans are still winding their way up the stalks of young corn like clingy toddlers. And the corn, well, it stands there like it owns the place. Because it kind of does. This is no accident. It's a design-a-perfect plant symbiosis, so brilliant, it almost feels smug. Corn grows tall, creating a living pole for the beans to climb. Beans, in return, fix nitrogen into the soil, keeping the corn fed. Meanwhile, squash spreads low and wide, shading the ground, locking in moisture, and giving weeds a good old passive-aggressive shove out of the way. You reach down and gently adjust a bean tendril that's gotten lost. Happens to the best of us. Stick to your corn, you whisper. It listens. For now. Historians agree on the effectiveness of this trio. It appears in Mesoamerican agriculture across centuries, but they still argue whether the planting was ritualized or purely practical. You like to think it's both. A little science, a little superstition, a little whisper to the soil when no one's listening. As you move between rows, you note how symmetrical everything is. These plants weren't thrown down randomly. You've laid them in careful patterns grids that reflect stars, echo rituals, and follow spacing guides, passed down by whisper more than word. Some farmers swear the crops grow better if you face them toward the temple of Tlaloc. Others claim it's the number of steps between each hill that matters. You just follow your gut, tanned, the faint memory of your grandmother, shouting instructions over a thunderstorm. A funny thing, while the Chinampas float and flex and shift, the plants somehow know where they are. It's as if the maize refuses to lean, the beans hold fast to invisible compass points, and the squash curves exactly where the sun needs it to. You like to believe the plants are smarter than you. It takes the pressure off. You pause at a squash blossom bright orange, still, dewy. It's beautiful and edible. You pluck it gently, tucking it into your woven pouch. You'll stuff it later with beans and herbs, if you're lucky. If not, well, raw squash blossoms don't taste terrible. Near the western edge, a tiny patch of chili peppers is coming in strong. You bend down, rub one between your fingers, and immediately regret it. The oils cling to your skin like betrayal. You remind yourself not to touch your eyes until at least 2 more hand washings and a short prayer. Still, you smile. The chili will sell well in the market, or bribe a neighbor, or ruin your uncle's dinner, depending on how mischievous you're feeling. You move to the water's edge, grabbing the stone basin you've left soaking overnight. It's your matata, grinding stone for maize. You set it up on a small plank, fish a pouch of dried kernels from under your canoe bench, and begin to grind. The rhythmic scrape is oddly comforting, like a lullaby played on gravel. Back, forth, back, forth. The kind of sound you forget to hear, because it becomes part of you. A dragonfly lands on your knee. You consider naming it, but then it darts off, probably to go commit a tiny act of chaos elsewhere. Around mid-morning, your neighbor floats by in his canoe. You don't know his name, but you know the sound his paddle makes. Soft, deliberate, almost apologetic. He raises a hand. You raise yours. No words. No need. That's how it is here. You all work in silence, not just because it's peaceful, but because the silence does something. It anchors the Chinampa. Loud noise. It stirs the water, unsettles the soil, makes the plants twitch. That's what the elders say, anyway. So you stay quiet, and the garden thanks you in squash. You wipe sweat from your brow. The sun is higher now, heat crawling across your shoulders. The plants are soaking it in, greedily. You give them a little water boost, scooping lake water with a gourd and dribbling it at the roots. It's a delicate dance, not too much, or the roots rot. Not too little, or the corn sulks. A fringe belief floats through your mind, something an old Chinampero muttered once after too many fermented cactus. Drinks maize can feel your mood. He'd insisted that angry farmers grew bitter corn. You're not sure you buy it, but still, you smile as you water the plants. Just in case. You spot a hole in your reed, barrier, probably a duck again. You grab a few new reeds and weave them in tightly, reinforcing the border like you're tucking the Chinampa in for a nap. It wiggles slightly beneath your feet, approving. You kneel once more and whisper a small thank you, not to the gods, not out loud, just to the garden itself. Because even if no one hears it, you know something does. The sky is full blue now, not a cloud in sight. You stretch your back, crack your knuckles, and look over your work. Everything's still green, still balanced, still strangely beautiful. In the distance across the canal, you hear a flute, a soft, drifting melody, played by someone with too much time, or a very important secret to keep. You close your eyes, and let it carry over the water, weaving its way between rows of maize, and squash blossoms, and chili peppers, with just the right amount of heat. A splash breaks your focus. You whip your head toward the edge of the Chinampa, just in time to see a blur of feathers and attitude. A duck bump, plump, and entirely too smug, flapping away from your bean patch, with something green in its beak. Probably a tomato. One of the good ones. You sigh. That duck has been casing your garden for days, pretending to nap on lily pads, while eyeing your ripest produce. You knew this moment was coming. Still, the audacity stings. You hurl a clump of moist reed at the fleeing thief. It lands harmlessly in the water with a plop, startling only a frog who wasn't even involved. The duck vanishes into a patch of reeds, probably to gloat in private. You make a mental note to reinforce your vegetable netting, or at least ask the gods for one functional scarecrow. This is Chinampa life. Floating gardens and floating thieves. You never quite know if you're farming or participating in a very slow, damp battlefield. You kneel again, inspecting the damage. 2 nibbled leaves, 1 missing fruit, and a trail of webbed footprints that somehow express nothing but contempt. Rude. You straighten and glance around. Beyond your own plot, the lake ripples gently with the low wake of a distant canoe. A heron stalks its breakfast near the shallows, frozen mid-step like a feathered statue. It's a living ecosystem out here: fish, frogs, ducks, insects, and you, the human with the least feathers and the most complaints. The Aztecs didn't just build floating farms. They built entire food webs. Chinampas supported more than maize and beans. Birds nested in the trees. Frogs croaked from the banks. Insects pollinated flowers. And, of course, fish teemed in the canals, occasionally caught and grilled when the crops weren't enough. You once heard someone call the Chinampas aquatic pantries. Accurate? You lean over the canal and spot a school of silvery fish darting between the submerged roots. They shimmer like living coins. You wonder how many other eyes are watching from below: catfish, axolotls, or perhaps something older. The water here feels ... aware. You dip your fingers in the surface. Cool, slick, not quite clean. The Aztecs managed water quality in ways modern folks rarely imagine, using water lilies, floating barriers, and selective canal flushing. Historians still debate whether the lake was ever truly drinkable, but one fringe theory claims certain areas were filtered by mats of living algae and volcanic sand. That seems optimistic, especially when you remember what else gets tossed in the canals. A rustle behind you draws your attention. You spin, ready for another duck ambush, but instead, find yourself face to face with a frog. A big one, the size of your palm and then some. It blinks slowly, utterly unimpressed by your presence. You blink back. The frog stays. You stay. It's a standoff. Then, with a flick of its legs, the frog hops into a patch of chili peppers and vanishes, probably to get into a spicy argument with a caterpillar. You shake your head. It's never just plants out here. It's drama. Slow, leafy, amphibious drama. You get back to work, rerouting a shallow trench where your squash vines are getting thirsty. The soil's a little too dry, probably due to last night's warm breeze. You scoop canal water with a half calabash and pour it carefully at the roots. The water disappears fast, gulped down by the parched soil like a secret. Nearby, a dragonfly lands on your tomato plant. For once, it doesn't immediately attack your face. Progress. You watch as it preens delicate wings vibrating in sunlight. In some Aztec beliefs, dragonflies were symbols of renewal and regeneration, agents of agricultural luck. You whisper a half-serious thank you, and hope it didn't overhear you threatening a duck earlier. You rise and stretch. Your knees pop like wet firewood. You hobble toward the far end of the Chinampa, where your compost pile is doing its best impression of a stewing volcano. You flip it lazily with a stick, releasing a wave of heat and a bouquet of smells best left undescribed. Still, the plants love it. A sudden flurry of splashes erupts behind you. You whirl ready for duck vengeance, but it's not a duck. It's a child, probably 6 or 7, paddling a tiny canoe with practiced ease. His boat is overloaded with morning glories and herbs, and he waves cheerfully before disappearing down a narrow canal. You're left with the soft slap of water and a mild existential crisis. What were you doing at that age? Probably eating dirt. This kid is running his own mobile flower business. It's midday now. The sun sits high, glazing everything in amber. Your shirt sticks to your back. You smell like lakeweed and productivity. Somewhere in the distance, a conch shell blows one long note, a musical yawn stretched across water, a temple call, perhaps, or a lunch break. Hard to say. You nibble a tortilla stuffed with beans and squash blossomed, one you picked earlier, now lovingly smashed between yesterday's flat bread. It tastes earthy, fresh, slightly duck-adjacent, if you're being honest. As you eat, you think about how the Chinampas aren't just farms. They're art. They're engineered sculpture. A floating ballet, choreographed by people who looked at swampy marshland and said, this could feed an empire. And they were right. Modern scientists have studied Chinampa agriculture and found it ridiculously efficient: high yields, year-round productivity, and almost no erosion. It's as if the Aztecs created a farming system that doubled as climate insurance. You wonder if they knew. Probably better than the folks who later built parking lots over half of it. You brush crumbs from your hands and sigh. One more task before you rest, rechecking the edges. The reed walls must be tight. The water mustn't seep in too quickly. The Chinampa holds only as long as you do. You crouch by the waterline, adjusting the bound reeds, pushing in fresh stakes. made from willow branches. Your reflection wobbles on the surface. Tired eyes, dirt-smudged cheek. A floating farmer in a world that doesn't float nearly as well as it used to. You smile anyway, because here, in this strange in-between space, water, part earth, part dream, you've made something grow, even if the ducks do occasionally rob you blind. You wake to the soft tug of water, lapping against your Chinampas' edge. The kind of rhythmic splash that could either mean a wandering canoe or a spirit arriving with particularly wet feet. Either way, you don't look yet. You stretch. Your back cracks. Something somewhere deep inside your shoulder makes a dramatic clicking noise, and you wonder, not for the first time, if maybe you've turned into one of your own reed fences. Today's different. You've been more like voluntold to paddle eastward, toward the floating flower gardens near the ceremonial platforms. It's not a place you visit often, too quiet, too perfumed, too observed. But once in a while, your Chinampa duties involve something a little more divine than squash inspection. You load up a few offerings, a basket of marigolds, some chilies, a twist of maize dough, not for trade, for the gods, or at least the men, dressed like gods, humming in low tones, on platforms covered in creeping jasmine. You step into your canoe, push off, and let the current guide you. The water out here smells sweeter. It's not your imagination. This part of the lake was once dotted with ceremonial Chinampas gardens that weren't for farming, but for worship. Blooms of color spiral across the water, petals floating in slow swirls like lazy fireworks. You pass between walls of bougainvillea and tall papyrus that seem to lean in, listening. You slow your canoe as you spot the first platform. It floats like a throne of flowers, all vibrant reds and lush greens, woven into geometric patterns that would make a hummingbird weep. On the far side, a priest stands perfectly still draped in feathers, one hand resting on a staff carved from obsidian. His face is painted half blue, half ash gray, a tribute to some deity with more titles than friends. You bow your head. He doesn't move. You don't expect him to. Instead, a boy steps forward from behind the altar. He's younger than you, but already has the ceremonial calm of someone who's been trained to pretend they don't feel mosquito bites. He gestures toward a row of small clay bowls lined neatly across the edge of the platform. You know what comes next. Without a word, you begin your part. You take the marigolds and weave them into the offering arch. You place the chili bundle at the base of the altar, next to what appears to be a carved turtle holding incense. Then you reach into your pouch and pull out the maize dough, gently, pressing it into a mold shaped like a sunburst. While you work, the priest begins to chant it not loudly, not theatrically, more like a murmur under the breath of the lake. Words older than cities. You don't understand all of it, but you know the tone. It's the voice of rain requests, pest removals, and cornfield confessions. It's not a shout. It's a conversation with the sky. One bowl contains something odd, greenish-gray paste, thick and lumpy. You know what it is. Crocodile dung, used here not just for symbolic rituals, but also strangely as sun protection. The priests smear it on their skin during long days in the open. It smells exactly as bad as you imagine, but they wear it like gold. A fringe belief holds that it shields not just from sun, but from curses. You hope they're right. You gesture politely that you'll pass on that offering today. Historians still argue whether these ceremonial Chinampas were purely religious or also political. Some believe the priests used them to demonstrate agricultural supremacy, how even the gods bless our squash. Others think it was simply a way to keep the gods in good spirits, especially the watery ones. This whole city depends on canals. You really don't want to offend the wrong amphibian deity. You're given a small flute, carved from bone. You're expected to play. It's been years. You hesitate, then lift it to your lips, and exhale a shaky note. It whistles. Weak, but passable. You manage a simple tune. It echoes softly across the water, met by the rustle of reeds and the distant response of another flute. Somewhere, another ceremony mirrors yours. The lake is full of these secret rituals, tiny synchronized gestures to keep the world balanced. You feel strangely proud, despite the fact your melody sounds like a frog with performance anxiety. The priest nods slightly. You've passed. The ceremony concludes without fanfare. No drums, no blood, just a final bow and the soft clink of bowls being cleared away. You step back into your canoe, lighter in spirit and heavier with the smell of incense clinging to your skin. On the way back, you drift past other ceremonial chinampas. Some are simple, just rows of fragrant herbs arranged in spiral patterns. Others are elaborate, with carved obsidian mirrors and hanging gourds filled with lake water meant to reflect the god's gaze. One features a statue of a jaguar mouth open, swallowing sunlight. You remember a story your uncle told during one particularly dry season. The priests sacrificed bundles of flowers instead of animals. The lake rose the next day. Some say it was mercy. Others say the gods were just tired of blood. You arrive back at your own Chinampa, which greets you with a distinct lack of pageantry. Just rows of corn needing weeding and a duck sitting exactly where it knows it shouldn't be. You chase it off half-heartedly. The duck quacks once. Rude. Still, there's something different in the air now. Your garden feels calmer, as if it heard the flute song and liked it. Or maybe it just appreciates the break from your usual humming. You kneel by your pepper plants and begin to trim the dead leaves. Each snip is a meditation. You find yourself moving slower, more deliberately. There's reverence now in your fingers, dirt under your nails, sweat in your eyes. The ceremonial gardens aren't just floating temples. They're reminders that even in a life of mud and mosquitoes, there's room for beauty, for intention, for speaking to the gods with tomatoes and flute notes instead of fear. You finish your chores as the sun begins to tilt. The water shimmers, golden. A dragonfly passes close, pauses mid-air, then darts away. The Chinampa creaks beneath you like an old friend, adjusting in sleep, and you breathe. You lie back on the planks of your Chinampa, letting the wooden beams press against your shoulders as the afternoon sky fades from silver blue to copper. It's the quiet hour, when most people are either napping, praying, or pretending to be productive, while actually spying on each other. You choose the option that involves the least effort, listening. The reed walls whisper. The water gurgles lazily beneath you. And somewhere, just faintly, you hear a flute again. Not the kind from ceremonies. This one's different. Playful. Improvised. The kind of music that drifts between cornrows and slips under your skin without asking permission. You sit up slowly, listening harder. The melody stops. That's when you realize you're not alone. A shadow moves across the far canal. You blink. It's a small canoe, low in the water, wrapped in strips of fabric like a traveling ghost. No oars, just a man barely visibly using his hands to paddle in total silence. You look closer. He doesn't carry crops, doesn't wear the garb of a farmer. His eyes flick toward you for only a second, then disappear into the maze of Chinampas. You don't follow. You know better. This isn't your first time seeing someone you weren't supposed to. The truth is, these floating farms aren't just gardens. They're roads, networks, hidden highways for secrets and messengers. It's always been that way. Long before the Spanish, before the temple raids, even before the big water walls were built, people have been slipping through these canals, with news, trade, warnings, and occasionally, revenge. Historians still argue how centralized Aztec surveillance actually was. Some say Chinampa zones were tightly monitored by local nobility. Others believe they operated under a quiet honor system. Don't ask questions. Don't answer any either. You personally lean toward the latter. After all, you've definitely seen the same woman paddle past with the same wrapped bundle 3 nights in a row at dusk. always humming the same off-key lullaby. You lean down and start trimming back the bean vines, pretending you're not distracted, but your ears stay tuned. There it is, again another soft splash, this one closer, not hostile, but purposeful. You glance behind you, nothing than a flash of color. A green sash, fluttering from a low branch near the canal bend. You frown. That sash wasn't there this morning. It means something, a signal, a marker. You walk to the edge of your Chinampa and look both ways, slowly, like you're checking for canoes or for gods. Still nothing. You return to your work, pretending not to think about it, but your fingers are moving too fast now. You're pulling weeds like they've offended your ancestors. This isn't paranoia. Well, maybe a little. But Chinampa life breeds caution. The silence isn't just peaceful, it's tactical. Sound travels fast on still water. A word whispered in one corner can reach another Chinampa in seconds if the air is right. That's how gossip works. That's how warnings work. That's how people vanish without ever being seen. You finish your row and sit down heavily. You chew a piece of dried cactus fruit to settle your nerves. It doesn't help. It never does. But it gives your teeth something to do besides grind in thought. You recall a story your grandfather once told. During a minor rebellion, messages were passed entirely through canal flute songs. One wrong note, and the wrong village got blamed. They say that village is still underwater. You shake your head. Probably not true. But it feels true, which is almost worse. A sudden rustling behind you makes you jump. You grab your digging stick. It's a dog, a small, mangy thing with a patchy coat and an expression that says, "I have fleas and secrets." It waddles onto your Chinampa like it owns the place, circles once, and plops down next to your compost pile. You stare at it. It stares back. You sigh. Fine, but no digging. The dog blinks once on agreement or a challenge. Hard to tell. You get back to work, but now you're watching the shadows more than the weeds. The dog doesn't move. It's either guarding you or judging you. Possibly. Both. The sun begins to lower, bleeding into the canals. You wrap up your chores, piling unused reeds into bundles and anchoring your canoe with a stone that probably has a god's face scratched into it. You pretend not to notice. As you tie off the last bundle, the flute music starts again, closer this time, less playful, more deliberate. Like a question posed in notes, you don't answer. Instead, you light a small clump of dried herbs at the edge of the Chinampa, not for the gods, for the watchers. You wave the smoke toward the canal, a quiet signal. I see you. I'm not part of this. The music fades. The dog finally shifts, lets out a long sigh, and curls up with its back to the canals, if satisfied that nothing tonight will require barking. You envy that kind of certainty. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders. The air cools quickly on the water. You sit down beside your compost heap, now warm from the day's heat, and let it cradle your spine like an earthen pillow. The Chinampa sways gently. You close your eyes. You don't sleep. Not fully, but you drift. And in the space between dreams and dusk, you remember something your mother once said. Even in a garden, there are always footprints you don't see. The wind has shifted. You feel it before you hear it cooler. Coming from the west, curling through the reed walls of your Chinampa, and rustling the squash leaves with more urgency than usual. You sit up. The compost pile beside you has cooled. The sky above is pink, but there's something brittle in the air, like dry paper, threatening to fold. You step to the edge of your floating garden and peer down the canal. No one, not yet, but you know that look in the lake's reflection tight. Ripples, birds flying lower, dragonflies skimming with more desperation than grace. Something's coming. Drought maybe, or worse, greed. You get to work reinforcing the corners of your Chinampa with fresh reeds. It's late for this kind of patch job, but your gut says now or never. You wedge in new stakes, Press them deep into the soft lake bed, hoping they'll hold if the water drops. You remember an old tale. Years ago, a noble family decided they wanted a Chinampa, very specific one. Theirs was too dry, too narrow, or maybe too humble for their tastes. So they arranged a quiet sabotage, cut the anchors, stole the compost, diverted a canal just enough to drown the nearby plots and make the original owner reluctantly sell. It worked, sort of. The new owners got their land, but nothing grew right afterward. Beans wilted, corn soured, one squash plant sprouted, a single fist-sized fruit that looked exactly like a screaming face. They had it blessed. It kept screaming. They moved. You don't know if that's true, but you've seen enough fungus to believe squash has opinions. You check your maize next. The leaves are slightly curled at the tips. You bite the inside of your cheek. Not a good sign. Water's too low in the root bed. You dip your gourd into the canal. It's lower than this morning. Maybe just evaporation. Maybe something else. You've heard whispers. A nearby lord draining extra water for a new set of Chinampas, meant for flowers, not food. Decorative plots. Canals lined with carved stone and perfumed with crushed herbs to please visitors. You want to be angry. You are angry. But mostly, you're worried, because Chinampas aren't made for showing off. They're made for surviving. And when too many people forget that, the system breaks. Historians still debate whether Aztec Chinampa management was centralized or communally. Some records show inspections, taxes, enforcement. Others suggest that neighbors simply policed each other with side eyes, gossip, and, occasionally, a mysteriously sinking canoe. You prefer the latter. It feels more human. You're not the only one sensing the shift. Across the canal, your neighbor is out late, too. He's dragging fresh willow stakes along his plot's edge. You nod to each other. He doesn't smile. Neither do you. This is serious. The dog from yesterday is back. It trots along the narrow plank walkway like it belongs here. Maybe it does. It sniffs at your basket of seed pods, then lays down next to them like a very hairy vault guard. You shrug and let it stay. You begin preparing your emergency compost trench, a narrow channel at the far end of your plot meant to absorb overflow or store moisture. You dig slowly, mindful of the root systems below. Your digging stick hits something hard. You scrape gently. A clay figurine. It's old, weathered, and shaped like a maize god with one ear missing. You brush it off, unsure if you've uncovered an offering or just last season's forgotten good luck charm. Either way, you set it upright at the corner of the trench. Can't hurt. As night falls, a thin mist begins to rise. The lake's version of a warning sigh. You gather your tools and double-check every boundary. The reed walls, the anchoring stakes, the compost mound. You even walk the perimeter, whispering softly under your breath. Not a prayer, exactly, but more like a plea to the mud. Stay, hold, don't let go. A fringe belief says that Chinampas have moods. If you treat them poorly, they sink you. If you ignore them, they rot. If you care for them, they protect you even against people. You hope that's true. You sit near the edge with your feet dangling above the water. The dog leans into your side, heavy and warm. Somewhere far off, someone is beating a slow rhythm on a hollow log. Not festive, measured, like a clock ticking in wood. And then just as you're starting to relax, happens a loud splash. Not close, not near, but significant. You and your neighbor both stand at once, scanning the darkness. You see nothing, but you feel it. Water diverted, a breach somewhere upstream. It might not reach you tonight, might not reach you at all, but the system has been disturbed. You mutter a few words your grandmother would have scolded you for. The dog doesn't flinch. You know what comes next. In the days ahead, canals may run dry on one end and flood on the other. Seeds may rot, vines may drown. Accusations will fly, quiet ones murmured over canoes and baskets, never shouted. Chinampa sabotage isn't a public crime, it's a silent one, done with cuts made at night and apologies offered only to the soil. You lie back again, arms crossed behind your head, staring up into a sky slowly swallowing the stars with mist. You wonder how many Chinampas will survive this season. Yours has made it this far. It's stubborn, like you. You close your eyes and think about all the old farmers you knew who kept their gardens afloat long after their knees gave out. One swore by planting chili near the maize to scare the evil wind away. Another swore by spitting in the canal every morning to establish dominance. You try both. It's worth a shot, as sleep tugs at your bones. You think one last time about the sabotage. You don't know who did it. You probably never will. But deep down, you hope their squash tastes like regret. The morning doesn't arrive so much as creep. Light seeps in from the east like it's apologizing for being late. The sky is pale and nervous. You sit up on your Chinampa, wrapped in your cloak, joints stiff, fingers numb. The dog is gone, so is the mist. What's left is a strange silence, not the good kind, not the sacred Chinampa kind, but a kind of breath-holding hush. You step to the edge and scan the water. It's wrong. The canal is lower by a handspan, maybe more. Your eastern edge is dry, exposing dark lake bed that crackles under the weight of your steps. The anchoring willows look confused, their roots partially exposed. You curse softly, but thoroughly. The sabotage wasn't far. Someone's rerouted a channel or blocked a flow. You don't need to see it to know. You feel it in the tilt of your floating garden. It sits slightly off now, leaning toward the dry patch like it wants to follow the water. You get to work immediately. First you recheck the compost trench. Still moist, still holding. That's something. Then you start hauling water, one gourd at a time, from the main canal to your wilting squash vines. You know it's not enough, but it's what you've got as you're working. You hear a sound you haven't heard in a long time, clattering hoofbeats, not on soil, on wood. You freeze. There it is again. Hooves on planks, horses. Somewhere, someone is crossing a temporary bridge built by invaders, not farmers. You look toward the distant edge of the Chinampa zone, where the Tenach city of Tenochtitlan once loomed proud and invincible. Now, you see smoke. Not ritual incense, the ugly kind, wood and cloth and something else you don't name. The Spaniards are here. They've been here, of course, but now they're here, in the Chinampa zone. Boots on reed platforms, metal on sacred mud. They don't know how this place works. Or worst, they don't care. You duck behind a row of maize and peer through the stalks. You can't see them yet, but you feel their presence. Loud, heavy. Everything the Chinampas are not. Historians say the Spanish conquest of Tenochtitlan was swift, but they forget. The Chinampas didn't fall easily. They held out, for days, 4 weeks. The lake protected them. The water confused cavalry. The floating gardens absorbed the damage and kept feeding people long after temples burned. You wonder if this is one of those days. You grab your tools not as weapons, but as shields. A digging stick is still a stick. You cover your compost pile with reed mats. You check the anchoring stakes again, harder this time. Maybe it's habit. Maybe it's denial. Your neighbor arrives silently in his canoe. You meet his eyes. No words. He nods toward the far canal. You see what he means. A canoe is burning. It drifts sideways, smoke curling up like a morning ribbon. The flames haven't touched your section yet, but they will. Fire doesn't float, but panic does. You turn to your maize. You whisper to it. You press your hands into the dirt and try to listen for that familiar hum, the sound of life, of growing. It's fainter today, still there, but muffled, as if the soil itself is bracing. You hear voices now, harsh, barking ones, Spanish, demanding, confused. The Chinampa layout frustrates them. Good, let it. These gardens aren't built on maps, they're built on memory. You hope they get lost. The dog reappears suddenly, wet and lit. It trots past you and flops down beneath your reed fence like it never left. You envy its detachment. You decide to act. You paddle to your emergency plot, a smaller Chinampa you've been nursing in secret, tucked between two decaying flower beds. You check the squash, still green. The beans, tangled but alive. It's something, a backup, a hope. You hear a splash. A child jumps from a boat into a canal, escaping a burning platform. Another canoe skids sideways as its rider paddles furiously, teeth clenched. You return to your main Chinampa and begin hiding what you can. Seed pouches go under reed mats, dried beans in a hollowed gourd beneath the compost pile, a few cobs of maize tucked beneath the dog, who doesn't even blink. There's a fringe, of course, that some Chinampa farmers booby-trapped their plots during the conquest, dug false walkways, set traps, sank entire plots with pull stakes. You don't know if it's true, but it should be. You hear them now. Closer. A metal boot thuds onto wood. A voice yells in a language you don't want to understand. Then silence again. You crouch, heart pounding, behind the maize. The reeds sway slowly. The sun is high, but the shadows feel longer. And then, the sound of water again. Not panic, just paddling. A canoe glides past your plot. In it, a woman sits tall, her face calm, her paddle slow. She looks straight ahead, not at you, but you see the movement of her hand, a subtle wave toward the water's edge. You look, a floating bundle, wrapped in reeds, drifting gently to your compost trench. You retrieve it when she's gone. Inside, seed pouches, herbs, a flute. You stare at the flute, its carved bone, the same tune you heard days ago. The message is clear. Survive, replant. Remember, you kneel beside your maize one. Last time the sun is hot, the air is dry, but the Chinampa still holds, and so do you. The sun has begun to sink. It doesn't fall, exactly, it melts, bleeds slowly into the canals, turning the water gold, then red, then that impossible shade of purple that only appears when the day is too tired to keep pretending. You sit at the edge of your Chinampa toes brushing the cool water, and you think, we're still here. You survived the day. The fire didn't reach your garden, not yet, anyway. The Spanish soldiers veered off course, confused by the twisting canals and the uneven footing. A few slipped into the lake. You didn't laugh. You wanted to. You didn't. Most of the Chinampas still stand, though some are scorched. Others have already been abandoned. Canoes have disappeared into the far corners of the lake, carrying seeds, tools, and silent stories. You know at least 2 families who've gone underground, literally hiding in dugouts beneath their platforms. You think about joining them, but for now, you remain above. Because the Chinampa remains above. You tend to it gently, like a wounded animal. You replace damaged reeds. You scoop fresh silt from the canal and spread it along the thinner patches of soil. You whisper to the maize, to the squash, to the beans. You thank them for staying, for holding fast, for growing despite everything. The dog is still here. 2. It lies with its head resting on a bundle of dry grass, tail twitching as it dreams. You don't know its name. It probably doesn't have one, but it hasn't left your side since the fire passed. And you decide, silently, that it will eat before you do tonight. You chew a bit of dried maize cake, stale, but filling. You haven't had chili in days, not since the greedy noble took control of the upstream irrigation. But the squash blossoms still come, and the beans are strong, and you even found a tomato hidden beneath the compost this morning. A survivor. You think about the roots, the ones buried deep under your garden, the ones that tether you not just to the lake bed, but to the past. Each reed, each willow post, Each layer of rotted vegetation and ash is a memory, a compacted history, a quiet resistance. Historians still puzzle over how long Chinampas lasted after the conquest. Some records say they declined immediately, swallowed by colonial systems and drained canals. Others claim they endured for centuries, adapting, shifting, staying afloat even when everything else sank. You believe the latter, because you're looking at it, you're standing on it. Even now, as dusk deepens and frogs begin their evening chants, the Chinampa is alive beneath your feet. You feel it soft and springy, but solid, breathing, remembering, and the seeds remember. 2. You kneel beside a fresh patch of tilled soil. From the reed bundle that floated to you earlier, you remove a pouch. Inside, tiny, perfect promises, maize, amaranth, chia. You press them gently into the soil, one by one, like secrets. You don't know if they'll grow, but you plant them anyway. The stars blink awake above you. The lake reflects them, trembling slightly with the wind. Fireflies join in, floating lazily between the maize stalks like slow, golden thoughts. The air smells of wet earth, crushed leaves, and that faint trace of smoke from the ruined plots across the canal. And still, your Chinampa holds. A canoe glides past in the dark. No lantern, no sound, just a soft ripple. You recognize the shape. The woman again, the one with the flute. You raise your hand slightly. She doesn't look, doesn't wave, but her paddle slows for a heartbeat. Then she moves on. You smile. You understand now. This lake is full of watchers, keepers, not loud, not many, but enough. You lie down on the planks, letting the wood creak under your weight. You stare at the stars. You let your breath slow. You let your garden breathe too. Because tomorrow will come, the sun will rise, the canals will glisten, and the maize will stretch toward the sky like it always has. Because this place, this floating farm, this quiet patch of defiance, this garden, built on silt and sweat, refuses to sink, even in silence. Even now, let's just stay here. A moment longer. Let your body feel the gentle sway of the Chinampa beneath you. The lake has stilled, and your garden rocks with the rhythm of dreams. The air is cool now, wrapped around your arms like a damp cotton blanket. It smells faintly of mint leaves and old clay, of ash and time. The stars overhead blur just a little. As your eyes begin to grow heavy, you hear the slow, deliberate call of a night bird far away, answered only by the soft buzz of insects and the occasional splash of something small, breaking the water's surface, then disappearing just as quickly. Your fingertips trail along the soil beside you. It's warm. It holds the day's heat, like a memory you're not quite ready to let go of. Somewhere, the dog has curled beside the beans, sighing into sleep, as if even it knows your garden is safe tonight. And as your thoughts begin to soften, like petals closing in the dark, you realize something simple. Even in a world where noise, fire, and change seem constant, silence holds, quiet persists, and the roots of your floating farm still reach deep into something strong. So let go now. Let the Chinampa cradle you. Let the reeds whisper their lullabies. Let the slow rhythm of ancient water carry you where dreams drift, and worries have no weight. The stars won't rush you. The seeds will wait. The lake, like always, will remember your name. Sleep now. Float easy. End of script. Sweet dreams.